Greetings. Well, I guess I opened a real can of worms, orchid seeds, I don't know, by trying to assist Ellen with the Orchid Isle project here. Because just as soon as we'll do one video about it, then, well, of course, then there's another one to do. And then I looked at it and said, well, I think we need more theory on this. But now I got a comment back. A gentleman wants us to show about how you tie orchids onto trees. It's really pretty simple. There's only a few rules. It's not much to this, especially not around here. If you live in eastern Hawaii, I think you could just about throw the things at a tree and they're going to take. But here behind me, I have a tree that I chose because it's in 3 stages, actually, as far as tying orchids on it. This was one of our beautiful red-flowered ohia, but of course it succumbed to rot. It's here on the driveway. I suppose car tires probably carried rapid ohia death in, and well, my tree died. I planted it and it died. Bye-bye. Anyway, in the meantime, Ellen had been hanging orchids on this thing because we could see it from the dining room. And well, recently I chopped it down except for the orchids. The orchids will stay. And in this case here, one of the upper limbs, this one right here. Here's an orchid that we have just recently tied on this tree. Now, this is Cattleya. It's one of the sympodial type orchids. You'll see purple twine. We have green twine. There's a number of different kinds of twine around here, but twine is generally what we have found works the best for this. The other thing to mention is that the growing tip of the orchid, the point where it's producing new growth, that goes at the trunk. You point it to the tree because you want the orchid to start climbing up the trunk of the tree, not out away from the tree. See? And so otherwise, we shake off any media that was on there, so we get rid of the sphagnum or the bark that was here. Put this thing up against the tree with the growing tip. Sometimes it helps to have 2 people, one to hold, one to tie, and then wrapped it with twine. Just tied it down tight and wait. Yeah, right here we have another Cattleya that is pretty recently tied. You can still see the string is visible there. And you'll see there are some dormant pseudobulbs out away from the trunk of the tree. And the new growth is towards the trunk of the tree. This one had quite a bit of roots on it. So you can see we're already a well-developed set of roots. And so just plastered against the tree and tied on. Right here we have a little bit older Dendrobium Nobile. This has been tied on long enough that the twine appears to be gone. Yep. Yeah, no string left. Over here we got one. This one's pretty funny, actually. This has been tied on more on the north side of the tree. Ellen was thinking, well, it would need some shade. It's an orchid. Give it a little bit of shade. So she put it on the north side of the tree. You can see the old gray pseudobulbs right down where it was originally tied. And then it began climbing the tree and climbing the tree and climbing the tree until finally it turned itself around due south, because this one apparently wants more light. And so there it is on the other side of the tree where we can no longer see it. And just like a stepladder, it's a chain here of the pseudobulbs going up, see? Where it had just climbed year after year. This one's been on that tree for quite a while. Here we have Dendrobium Nobile, or Hona. In this case, it's on a papaya. That's not typical. Okay, papaya is kind of short-lived for this, and papaya also has pretty soft trunk and bark. You can see right here. See that groove? That's where the string was that held this thing on. It's long gone now. It's been removed, and the roots have wrapped. They're all over the place here. They appear to adhere pretty well to papaya trunk. But papaya is pretty soft and short-lived for the job. You can see here, though, with a groove on that trunk, why it is that we don't use wire, nails, fishing line, or other more durable materials when you're putting orchids on trees and plants. Use something that rots away, and rots away fairly quickly. You're better off having to pick your orchid up and put it back on than you are having to replace the plant you tied it to. And over here we have an Oncidium hanging in this tree. And if you notice there's all this beard of moss hanging below. That's actually the Oncidium's roots hanging in the air that are coated in moss. And at least most of us around here believe that isn't the best thing in the world, and so we tend to go by and clean the moss off periodically that gets on our tree orchids. Well, here's a spider orchid. And boy, this one's been around a while. You can see by the accumulation of moss and stuff on it. This was planted many years ago. Stuck onto a Satsuma mandarin. Satsuma is a fairly flat citrus, and so there's sunlight coming from above in this tree, enough for this orchid to grow. I see Ellen has also inserted a cattleya right here. Well, there's still a little twine left, so it's probably in the last year or so. But when you're placing orchids on trees, one of the important things is, do you have enough light for the orchid that you're planting? And some trees are really dark. Here's some old work with Oncidium on coffee. Orchids seem to like coffee trunks. It looks like the flower is gone bad, but here's a cattleya tied onto rambutan. There's also another one down there. Now I see both of those are fresh enough that they still have the string. It's visible, wrapped around, but they're also spreading roots nicely, so they've been back here for a while. I can't tell you for sure how long. There's cattleya on the south side of Mountain Apple. Well, there's something to watch out for. We got one of them nasty Himalayan raspberries coming up in our orchid. Boy, we don't want that. This one is also fairly fresh. The twine is still showing back here. This one is not fresh, and frankly, to me, it looks like it might be dislodging itself from the trunk a bit. We'll see. It's kind of moving away from the tree. Well, here we have a real collection on tree trunks, and also on pieces of coal wood hung by tree trunks and so on. What this is here is Bergmansia. This is the angel's trumpet. Angel's trumpet seems to be a pretty good place for orchids. They actually kind of like it here. Most of them do pretty well. Sunlight fluctuates a lot because I prune this thing, and so right now we got a lot of sun in here. I just cut the plant back. But there's any variety here. Big one down there at the bottom of the screen is the Oncidium cherry baby. That's one that smells like cherries or chocolate or vanilla or whatever, however it comes to your nose. Very fragrant. Here's Oncidium, and it's on a Phoenix robellini, dwarf Laotian date palm. It's been there for a while. It's hanging in good. One of the things I worry about with palm tree trunks, though, some kinds, either the fronds fall away from the trees and knock the orchids off, or in the case of the robellini, where you got stubs from the fronds that hang in there, sometimes I worry about developing a rot in the side of the tree trunk with orchids on palms, but people put them there. I don't know. Here's one of the little bulbophyllum orchids on kukui nut. It's walking itself all over here. As you can see here, it's going straight up the trunk, the outer space there. You want to try to avoid putting them in crotches or putting them in holes in the trees, because they'll probably help cause rot. They'll get accumulations if you do that. Usually the outside of the trunk and the vertical portion is the best. Sometimes horizontal limbs can be used, but our cat will walk them off on you if you put them on horizontal. She'll walk them off even going straight up the side of the trees here, but not as much. Avocado trees work pretty well too if they're not overly dense. There's sunlight coming in underneath. Here we have a real nice growth of vanilla orchids and some honahonas popping up between them over there. Doing real nice, hooked onto avocado. Here we have Oncidium growing on Hibiscus. And it looks like it's getting ready to leapfrog over to a coffee tree too. It's growing off the hibiscus into the coffee. This hasn't adhered very well to the hibiscus. We picked this one up off the ground before where it ripped loose. Currently it's on there with a rope, not a piece of twine. Oh, here's orchids on Beetle Nut. Now this palm has a long shaft with the leaves have dropped away. Now be careful with things like coconut and that, where if you still have fronds that may drop away and you put the orchids on, it's going to knock them right off. So palms can be troublesome, but Beetle Nut seems to work pretty well. It's a little bit different approach, but here we have a vanilla orchid that was rooted in a pot of bark at the base of this coffee tree, and then it just took off and started scaling up the tree. There's Dendrobium Nobile on Koa. You can see the strings wrapped around the pseudobulb there, and the roots have been growing downward and onto the Koa and adhering. Now in this case with the honahonas, it gets a little weird because there wasn't really a whole lot of a growing point. Growing point was up here. So when you're doing this, you use your best judgment. This one's been tied on all along. I see Ellen tied the entire old pseudobulb all the way up. Well, now here we have two very recent. These, one of them's a Dendrobium, the other one's a Cattleya. You can see that the purple twine is still showing, hanging loose in the air, so Ellen must have taken these out of the most recent acquisition and tied them on over here. So this has just been done. And as you can see, the most green or growing portion of the orchid is tied at the trunk. There's a very happy orchid on Koa tree. And then I see down there behind it, we have again another new Cattleya that's recently been tied on. Hasn't even begun to spread out. So the moment your work is finished, it should look like that. There was a walk around actually looking at orchids that are tied on trees. It's a bare few rules for doing this. One, if you're going to try it, you really need to have a climate where it might work. So in the U.S., I'd say Florida, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, Guam, places like that, this works. It's possible with certain varieties, if you're working maybe like in very southern California or, along the Mexican border, way down maybe in Texas somewhere. I don't know. Hard to say. You guys will know, more than I will. Around here, it's crazy. Okay, it's so easy to do. But, again, don't use materials that don't break down. Don't screw the orchids to the trees, nail the orchids to the trees. Don't use wire to put them on the trees, etc., etc. Don't use anything that might damage the plant you're mounting it on. Plain old garden twine works just fine. We found that it will hold the plants in place ordinarily long enough before it rots that they adhere with their roots. The whole point is you want the roots holding the plant on, not a nail or something. Again, isolating the growing point of the plant, and that would be the end where the new shoots are coming from, not the end where the old dormant pseudobulbs are. That's for sympodial orchids. Now in monopodial orchids, The only thing I have to say on monopodials is if you're going to put Phalaenopsis, for instance, on a tree, around here it's awful wet for Phalaenopsis. They get too much water in the whorls of the leaves in the cup there, and they can rot. Cant the orchid at an angle when it's mounted so that the water runs out of the whorl. Yeah, they need water. They like the rain, but they don't like water standing in the whorl. As far as the Vandas are concerned, well, Vandas, we ordinarily don't even grow them with containers or media or anything. We just hang these things in the air and then put little bags of fertilizer on them. So obviously Vandas are very well suited to culture dangling from trees. Try to put them on the outsides of the trunks. I would avoid putting them on horizontal areas as much as possible. Stay out of pockets in the trees. Stay out of crotches. That will tend to accumulate debris, and you'll probably start to get rot, maybe both on the parent tree and maybe the orchid. So keep them clean on the sides of the trunks where the water's going to run down and away. Don't use any moss or any media with them. Just the bare orchid right to the tree. They take better that way. Also, if you have too much media there, you might develop rot in the tree trunk. It'll start holding water, and you don't want that either. As they grow, it's a good idea to keep the moss cleaned off of them. If you live in Mountain View, we get moss on everything here, including my back if I don't walk fast enough. So the moss will sometimes build up so that it holds too much water. As far as fertilizing them, they actually will get a lot of bird droppings. They'll get a lot of dead bugs and nutrients from debris that falls out of the trees they're in and so on. Kind of keep them, ambling along so they're not starving to death. But to get a really good presentation, you will need periodically to apply liquid orchid fertilizers the same way you would when you have potted orchids. If you want them to thrive and you want them to grow and make a lot of flowers for you, which is the point, right? You want to feed them. We don't feed ours nearly as much as you probably should. Some of them have never been fed since the day they were hung on the trees. They still grow, they still bloom. They just don't bloom with such a riot of profusion, that's all. And of course there's the light. In general, orchids, most of them kind of prefer part shade, but there are some full sun ones. So understanding the plant you have in your hand, what is its light requirement? Some of us are real good at judging that stuff, and people who've been around orchids for a long time kind of know all that pretty much. But if you're brand new, it's the first time, and you're very uncertain about how much light, generally good filtered sunshine, and especially if it comes in during the morning. Hot afternoon sun is much harder on orchids than bright morning sun. Morning sun is cool, and the spectrum isn't as burning on the plants, and so having them in morning sunlight's great. Facing east is great with full sunshine. Some of them want to be in more shade, some want to be in more sun. Again, identifying your candidate there, and then there are charts out there. The old Ortho How to Grow Orchids book has a wonderful chart, actually, and utilizing photographic light meters in the camera, which these days I guess you can put an app on your smartphone for a light meter. If you're uncertain about light, look at the charts, figure out with the orchid, if you got a dendrobium, take a look, see what is the candle power range, and then take your light meter and stand where you wanted to put it, and in the middle of the day, turn it on, see what you get. Maybe you get enough in the morning, that's half a day is plenty enough at that frequency of light, so it doesn't have to be all day long or anything on that order at all. Dappled light throughout the day is usually good. Too much strong southern light on a lot of these orchids, and you're probably going to burn leaves. They're not going to look as good. And then, the Gila Orchid Society, as I've said in a few previous videos, has acquired most of the stock from an orchid farm that closed down here. Thank you to Calipana Tropicals for all those orchids. And they've been busy. There've been teams of people working. We've had folks here on the farm helping us transplant. Cahoa's been over a couple times. We've had other people who, at the zoo, for instance, yesterday, orchids were being tied into trees at the zoo. And so my partner, Ellen Train, is doing a lot of the coordination on all of this. And so if you're interested in having actual hands-on experience tying an orchid to a tree where no one cares whether you messed up or not, okay, and they won't even be your orchids, so you don't have to worry about whether they die, you'll want to get a hold of Ellen. That's Ellen Train, and it's the email is peacetrain@gmail.com. That's PECE at gmail.com. Get a hold of Ellen. We got more orchids to tie in the trees here on the farm, and so, probably get some of that in. And then I know there are crews that are going to assemble and are going to be spreading out all across the area, doing the Orchid Aisle Project, putting these orchids up all over in public areas. Well, you want to learn about it, this is the time. Contact Ellen, get a membership with the Orchid Society. Doesn't cost much, a lot of benefits, food's good, lots of orchids, great people, you'll love it. So that is actually my best suggestion for people who are here or who are vacationing here, it doesn't matter, who want to learn about putting orchids up on trees. Then you're going to have a whole crew of experts. I am by no means an orchid expert. Probably much better with a whole lot of other things like nursery, food production, fruit growing, and things like that. I know enough because I sold orchids for years while living in California. That was part of my business, was the sales of orchids retail. I know a little bit more than the next hippopotamus out there, but not that much. People in the society are the ones that know, because a lot of the growers even belong, and they're there at the meetings and all that, and you get to rub elbows with people who are like literally have orchids sticking out of them all over the place. These are orchid people. Aloha, y'all hang loose there.